Rishi Sunak.
Perfect. Thank you, Gareth. Hi, everyone. How are you? As Gareth saying, actually, what an incredible place. So congratulations for all working here, and thank you for having me. It's brilliant to be here with IKEA in Wincanton. I must say, everything's been superb so far, although my team were a little bit sad that there were no meatballs at lunch. But I don't know about how your canteen works, but other than that, it's been brilliant. So thank you for having me. Now, I think yesterday you would have heard some news about inflation. Today you may have seen what the Bank of England has announced with interest rates, and I'm sure that actually fills many of you with some anxiety, right, and some concern about what's going on and what does that mean for you and your families. Now, I'm here to tell you that I am totally 100% on it, and it is going to be okay, and we are going to get through this. And that is the most important thing I wanted to let you know today. Now, you should know, look, I know this won't make it any easier, but what we're grappling with here is something that many countries around the world are also grappling with at the same time as we are right now. So if you look at interest rates in Australia, in Canada, in New Zealand, across the world, they're all at high levels. Actually, interest rates in Europe are the highest they've been in for 20 years because they're all grappling with inflation in the same way that we are. Many of you may have friends or family in those places, and if you spoke to them, they'd tell you the same thing. Now, that doesn't make it any easier. Of course I know that. But it's important for you to know that we're not alone in dealing with this. And I know how important this is, and that's why at the beginning of the year I made a speech and I set out my 5 priorities for the country that I wanted to deliver as your Prime Minister. The first of those was to halve inflation. I know how important this is. That's why I set it as my top priority. And look, it's not easy. Right? Rooting out inflation is not easy. It requires difficult decisions. It doesn't happen overnight. But if we don't get on top of it, it would just get worse and it would last longer, and that's not going to do anyone any favours. It's not going to be good for you and your families in the long run. And even though it means I have to make some difficult decisions, that's the type of Prime Minister I am, because I want to do the right thing for you and your families in the long term. Now, look, why does inflation matter? Right? Like why did it matter to me? Why did I set it as my top priority? It's pretty simple. It's because inflation eats into the pounds in your pocket. It's as simple as that. Makes everybody poorer. It means prices go up. It means your savings get eroded. It puts jobs and livelihoods at risk. And that's why it's so important that we target it and get it down. That's why I said I wanted to halve it on its way to getting it back down to 2% where it belongs. And I am absolutely confident that if we hold our nerve and stick to our plan, we will do that. Right? And you should feel the same confidence that I do, because we are going to get through this and we're going to get this done. Now, why do I feel confident? What is that plan I'm talking about? Well, 3 parts to it. The first is I've got to make sure government is doing everything that it needs to do, and that means being responsible with our borrowing. Right? Because we cannot, in a situation like this, borrow too much money, because that makes everything worse. So that means, much as I would love to, I'd love to cut your taxes tomorrow. Right? You'd love that, I'd love that. Of course I would. Right? That's hard to do, because that means I have to borrow more money to do it. Right? Another thing is, I can't say yes to every single thing that people want me to spend more money on, right? Because that would mean we'd have to borrow money to do all of that. That means I have to make some difficult choices. I have to prioritize, same as all of you do in your household budgets. I have to do the same thing too. And it means when we're trying to figure out how we pay all our fantastic public sector workers, I need to think about what's affordable, what's responsible, again, so I can manage our borrowing. Now, none of those things that I talked about are easy. Right? Those are all difficult decisions that I have to make. But if I just gave in to the easy thing every time, that would just mean more and more government borrowing. That just puts fuel on the fire, makes inflation worse, pushes up interest rates even higher. So even though it's tough for me in the short term, doesn't make my life easy. Anyone who tells you that it would be easy isn't being straight with you. I want to be straight with you. That means I do have to make these difficult decisions. But that's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for you and your families in the long run, and that's why I'm going to stick to the course and manage our borrowing. Now, the second part of the plan is making sure that we tackle all those areas where inflation is particularly bad. Right? Energy is an obvious one. Right? The bills that you've had to pay over the last year have been extraordinary. Right? Absolutely extraordinary. Never seen anything like it. Now, I'm pleased they're going to be starting to come down. Right? So bills are going to come down about 430 quid starting in July. That's good news. The worst of this, and they'll keep coming down after that. But that's just now. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again, and that they keep coming down, that means we need to have more energy. So we're investing more in renewable energy like offshore wind, building new nuclear power stations, but also making sure that we get more energy here at home from the North Sea, more oil and gas, which we're going to need for the next few decades as we transition to a cleaner future. So we're investing in that too. Now, food is another area where your weekly shop, right, has gone up far too much in the past few months especially. So we're looking at the supermarkets, making sure that they're behaving responsibly and fairly when it comes to pricing all those products to make sure that we're easing the burdens on your weekly shop. And then when it comes to jobs, I think most of you probably reading the paper, you'll have seen that businesses everywhere really need people to work at the moment and it's finding it hard to find them almost everywhere. So what we're doing is reforming our welfare system to make sure that if you can work, then you should be working. You shouldn't be able to just be at home. So we're going to reform our welfare system to make sure we're doing that. But at the same time, we're also cutting the cost of childcare to make it easier for those working parents who want to work to be able to go back to work after they have children, because that's something that I think will make a difference too. So that's the kind of second part of the plan, just going after all those specific things. Then the third part of the plan is helping those who most need help through the worst of this. Now, how have we done that? Well, most importantly, we've helped with your energy bills. You might not know this, but we actually made a decision, I made a decision when I was your Chancellor, to tax the kind of excess profits that the energy companies are making because of the war in Ukraine, and use that money to help pay all your energy bills. And so that support is worth about half of your typical family's energy bill. It's worth about £1,500 of support. That is what the government has done over the past several months. Now, that's the scale of what we've done. It's enormous. It's like the furlough scheme, quite frankly, in its size. But that is, now I know it's bad, and you're still looking at these bills saying, oh my gosh, these are massive bills. But that's after we've taken about 1,500 quid off them. So that gives you a sense of how much we've tried to help on energy. But it's not just on energy. We're also providing extra help for people who really need a bit of extra help. So those on the lowest incomes, the national living wage has gone up. Hopefully many of your wages have gone up like the national living wage over the last year, because we want to make sure those on the lowest incomes see that benefit. Pensioners, whether it's your parents, your grandparents, their state pension has gone up several £100s this year to help them. And anyone who's on universal credit, they're also getting an extra £900 this year of support. So those who need a little bit of extra help are really getting that help from the government. And at the same time, the things that you guys do a lot, which is travel, we're trying to help there. So we've cut fuel duty, which will save you about 100 quid this year for those of you that drive. Also bus fares. We've capped bus fares at £2 outside of London just to help people as they're getting around. So look, all those things, and we can talk later about the other things we're doing, hopefully will just ease the burden as we get through the worst of this inflation challenge. But in conclusion, I'll kind of end where I started really, is that this is obviously a challenge. It's a challenge that many countries are facing right now, but we are on it. We are on it, and we are going to get through it. Now, that's not easy, as I said, and anyone tells you that it's easy or it can happen overnight, they're not being straight with you, right? And I want to be honest with you, these things are tough. They require difficult decisions, but that's what you should get from your government, that's what you should get from your Prime Minister, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell it to you straight, and I'm going to do the things that we need to do to bring inflation down. And I'm confident that we're going to do that. And the reason that we can feel better about the future is because once we get it down, that is the foundation on which we can build a better economy, right? That's how we'll create more jobs and be able to pay people more, invest more in public services, right? All those good things that we want are built on the foundation of getting inflation back down. And ultimately, that's what I want. I want to build a better country for you, your children, your grandchildren, and tackling inflation is the first thing we need to do to build that better future. So look, thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm open to any and all questions before we get to the media. So who wants to kick off? Yes.
I heard you saying that you want to have the inflation. So my question is, what are the economic strategies and policies that you have in place which can effectively achieve that objective?
So it's how do we bring inflation down? Well, the first and foremost way we do that is through interest rates. And that's one of the reasons the Bank of England today put up interest rates. And that's the way that all countries tackle inflation. It's called monetary policy when the Bank of England put up interest rates or bring down interest rates. And they've put up interest rates a lot here, as they have in many other countries, because we all need to tackle inflation. Now, the second thing we need to do is the government bit that I was talking about, is not borrowing too much. Because if I was doing lots of things right now that meant that the government was going to borrow tons more money, you should look at that and say, well, that's not a very sensible economic policy, right? And any time you hear from a politician or anyone else something that means the government will be borrowing more money, that should set off an alarm bell in your heads and say, hang on, inflation's really high, interest rates are already going up. Is that going to make the situation better or worse? It might sound great, right? All those things I talked about. Let's cut your taxes over here. Let's spend some more money over there. Let's do massive, pay awards for everyone in the public sector because we really value the work they do. If I did all those things, right, it might feel great for a day, for a week, for a month, and pretty quickly it would turn out to have been a really bad idea, right? And even if we'd given everyone an extra £1 through a tax cut or paying them a lot more, actually if inflation got worse and interest rates went up, we would just be getting more than that £1 back later. So that's not the right thing. So those are the kind of two elements of the strategy that need to be right. And then the third bit is increasing the supply of things. Inflation ultimately is more people buying things than we have supply for, right? That's what pushes prices up. So it's all those things I talked about, getting more workers into the labour force for businesses, reducing the costs of childcare, reforming welfare to do that, getting more energy supply. And we have a whole new department for energy security. I created it as Prime Minister. A department focused solely on our energy security so we can build more supplies of energy. So what's happened to us over the last year never happens again, right? So it's making those long-term decisions. So those are the kind of bits of the economic strategy. Sound right? Good. Right, who's next? Yes.
Hi, I was going to ask, do you have any ideas on how to help with the NHS at the moment? Because I've just spoken to some family members of mine, and they've just come up with problems, just face up problems left, right, and centre, like waiting 45 minutes for an ambulance, and like my grandmother just to book 6 months to see a doctor or a GP. It's just like, what's going on? Like, any ideas?
Yeah, lots. So when beginning of the year, I talked about that speech I made. Set out 5 priorities. They were to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists, and to stop the boats, right? And we should probably talk about all of those, hopefully. So cutting waiting lists is one of my 5 priorities because they're too big, right? And people are waiting too long. And why is that? I mean, it's simple, one word, COVID, right? We had a pandemic, which lasted a very long time. That was the focus of the NHS, rightly. And during that period, all the people who otherwise would have gone and got their treatment couldn't get it, didn't get it, and now they're all coming back, and that's why the backlogs are as high as they are. But I do a meeting almost every week with the CEO of the NHS and the team, and we've got a really, really good plan in place to bring all those numbers down. What does it mean? It means more doctors, more nurses, more ambulances, and then being a bit cleverer about how we do things. Because I know you all love the NHS and you want me to spend lots of money on it. We're doing that. But I think all of you probably also think, are we making sure that we spend that money as efficiently as we can, right? Is every pound of it being used really well? And there's lots of things we can do differently now that will help us get the waiting list down. So I don't know was she waiting, you don't have to tell us, but if anyone's waiting for surgery at the moment or an elective appointment, we're using things called community diagnostic centres, which instead of having to go to a hospital to get your MRI scan or your CT scan, we're building new little units next to supermarkets, shopping centres, which all they do is do all the scanning. So rather than people have to go to a hospital and then when they get there it's not ready because someone else had an accident and that gets rushed in, we're just going to do all the diagnostics somewhere else, and that's really effective. Similarly with surgery, instead of it being all in the same hospital where it keeps getting disruptive when your grandmother's meant to have an appointment and they're like, no, sorry, we've had this accident today. We've just got a standalone unit where all they're going to do that day is lots of hip replacements or lots of cataract surgery, and it's not going to get disrupted. So we're rolling those out, and those are helping too. And you're seeing the results. Actually, I think everyone remembers at Christmas, remember how bad it was for ambulance times. That's improved a lot. People were waiting an hour and a half on average for an ambulance for a serious injury. That's come right back down to around half an hour, and we want to keep that and get it improved from there. So look, there's a plan in place, more doctors, more nurses, more ambulances, and more interesting ways to use technology and drive performance in the NHS. So the money is there, don't have any doubt about that. There's a record amount of money going in to the NHS. We've just got to make sure we use it efficiently, and we'll, over time we will start to see those waiting lists come down. The last thing I'd say is that, look, I first wanted to go after the people who have been waiting 2 years. We eliminated that last year. In spring this year, we've virtually eliminated all the people who are waiting a year and a half, right? So we've virtually eliminated that. And then the next plan for next year is to make sure we eliminate almost everyone who's waiting 1 year, right? So look, none of those are going to be easy, right? Those are all challenging targets that I've set, but I really want to get performance to be better. And that's what we're doing, so that your grandmother and everyone else gets the care they need. Right, who's next? Yes, sir.
Thank you, thanks. How can we ensure that, say, public procurement policy sort of supports businesses domiciled here in the UK, so that we capture that value and return it back to the exchequer through, public procurement?
Yeah, so the simple answer is because of Brexit, we can now do that. Right? One of the advantages of leaving the EU is that we are now in charge of what's called procurement policy. What does procurement policy mean? It's the policy that you described as how the government and all public organisations do contracts, how they select the people who are going to provide services to them. And now that we've left the EU, we're in charge of writing our own rules, and we're allowed to be a little bit different about how we do that. We can value different things. For example, is the business providing lots of apprenticeships in the local area, employing local people, and adding all that value that you talked about to our UK economy. So that is one of the clear advantages of Brexit. We've got a new law that's going through Parliament that will actually implement that programme, and I think it's going to be great for particularly small businesses. I think big businesses are generally quite good at navigating all these rules, but particularly for small and medium-sized businesses, this is going to be a real benefit, and it's going to be great for the UK economy. That's one of the practical examples of something we're doing differently after we left the EU. All right. Yes, sir.
Hello, nice to
Hi.
meet you. I'm here today, really fortunate to be here today with some of the IKEA future leaders. And we work very much in a values-based leadership. You've described some of the really difficult decisions you have to make every day. I just wonder, on a personal level, what are the core values that inform your leadership style?
Right, where are they here? Where are these young ladies? Are they scattered? Hands up in the air. Who are you? Right, here they all are. Brilliant. So are they on a leadership training program? Ah, great. Well, you guys tell me, actually, what do you guys think is important?
I think it's important that we lead with the IKEA cultures and values in mind, that we maintain integrity, we create a trusting environment, we treat people respectfully. So it's about looking after each other. They're the important things about leading, and communicating the why is so important as well.
I think for me as well, it majorly comes to leading by example. So treating people how you expect to be treated yourself. Being very open and honest about, hard times as well as good times, so that as a leader you can come across as somebody who is relatable, and you can lead then in a strong way. But absolutely, as Alicia said, it comes down to connecting our own personal values to the IKEA values as well.
Yeah, I think for me, togetherness is really, really important, and showing that actually across our company we all are going after the same thing, and the same core values are important to all of us. I think championing this movement with sustainability and showcasing the right way forward with that, and then making sure that it's communicated across all levels and it's not something exclusive.
Yeah. No, you know what? A lot of what you said I try and do as well, actually, which and all of you picked on a similar theme, which is about being honest, good times and bad, integrity, and trying to do things together. I think for political leadership, that's really important, because I think all of you need to have trust in your politicians. And that comes from a couple of things. I think it comes from me being honest with you in good times and in bad about what we're facing, what it's going to take to fix it, not promising solutions that I know are not going to work just because they sound good or make my life easier, right? That's not acting with integrity, that's not being honest with people, and I think people can see through that. So I always try, as I'm doing now, as we're talking about the economy and inflation, not sugarcoating that this is tough and it's hard, but we're going to get through it, and that's going to mean we need to take some difficult decisions sometimes. So I think that's an important part of building that trust. And then the second thing is delivering on the things that you say, which again, kind of you guys touched on. And I think lots of politics in the past has been, people promise a lot of things, and then it never actually happens. I want to restore people's trust in politics by not just being honest about what we're doing and how we're doing it, but then actually delivering on the things that I say, right? So I'm not going to promise the earth, right? I'm not going to promise I can fix every single problem, but I say, look, here are my 5 priorities. I've set them out really clearly, and you guys should be able to hold me to account, right? In 6 months, 9 months, a year, year and a half, you can kind of say, are you making progress on the things that you said you were going to make progress on? Are those the right things for the country and for my family? And then you can make a judgment about how I'm doing, right? But it's got to be about delivery, not just about talking. It's got to be actually doing things. You know, your grandmother needs to get her appointment, and someone else's grandmother, when something happens to them, that the ambulance comes on time, like these things need to feel like they're getting better, not worse, right? And that's what I'm about doing, and that's how you restore trust in politics. I'm a different type of politician. I want to change things so people do have trust, and that is about being honest with them and about delivering on the things you say. It's actually very similar to what you guys said. Thank you. All right, yes, sir at the back.
So recent research by Generation Logistics showed that 90% of young people won't consider logistics as a career, whilst 40% of those see it as critical to the UK's success. So how important do you think it is that more young talent consider logistics as a career of choice, and how can we achieve that?
Well, of course it's important, right? I mean, you guys are the lifeblood of our economy. Nothing happens without you and your colleagues doing the same jobs across country being involved in it, right? Like everything that happens has to happen through people like you, businesses like yours, right? So we can't have a functioning economy without all of you. So it's absolutely mission critical to how we live our lives and everything that we're used to. So I think that's a pretty compelling reason to go into it. And the good news is that it's growing, right? Your industry is growing, right? Which is fantastic. Look, the hundreds of jobs that are created here by that investment, you know, good jobs doing interesting things. And the best way, I think, to get young people into it is through things like apprenticeships. And I think it's showing young people that there's an exciting path into this new career that they can get into quite quickly, where they can study and earn at the same time. They can do it with other people, and that they can see there's a career ahead of them when they can progress and keep learning new skills. And you know, you guys all have that opportunity, right? And that's fantastic. When you work for good companies who are providing those opportunities, it's a really compelling vision. And we just got to get out there and communicate it. And you know, one thing when it comes to apprenticeships, right, a lot of the focus in the past was all on everyone going to university. We've got to make sure everyone realizes apprenticeships are an incredible option for people. We've really improved the quality of them. They work brilliantly. And one of the small things we've done, which will make a difference, is, you know, those of us that went to university will remember the UCAS form, right? It's that big kind of thing that you have to do. It's a whole process. Everyone's focused on it. For the first time now, we've moved apprenticeships onto the UCAS system, right? We're in the process of doing that. So it doesn't feel like it's a whole different thing, that it's less good than university. It's like, hang on, there's lots of different options. They're all great, right? And actually you should be able to apply and find them all on the same system. So small practical things like that mean that someone will see an opportunity that it might not have considered before and then think, actually, you know what? That works for me. And I'm sure if any of your friends spent time with any of you or came here, they'd be pretty inspired by what all of you are doing and the skills you're learning and the careers you've got. And that's probably the best thing we can do, is get you guys filming a bunch of videos and put that out there, right? Good. Right. Sir.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned apprenticeships, and I totally agree they're a really important avenue for us to build skills at Wincanton. We have around about 335 people on programme at the moment. We're big supporters of apprenticeships, but yet we only utilise about 54% of our levy, and we work really hard at using the levy as best we can. So there's been discussion about reforms, I understand, around the apprenticeship levy, making it more flexible so that we can give a broader pool of colleagues opportunities for upskilling. Any update on the reforms, please?
Yeah, so I know it's something that the Department for Education and the Treasury are talking to businesses about, so that conversation is ongoing. One thing we have done, which should help you, is allow big companies to spend their levy or transfer it to small and medium-sized businesses in their supply chain. So I think that is a relatively new thing that I think came into force last year, and that will allow you to transfer a bulk of your budget into, even if it's not your own company, it's companies that work through your supply chain. That was something that businesses talked to me about when I was Chancellor, and I was pleased to put that in place. So hopefully that will help, and there's always a kind of an ongoing conversation about what's the right flex in the apprenticeship system. Look, we went, for those of you that don't know how this works, this is the apprenticeship levy is something that big companies pay. They pay an apprenticeship levy, it goes into account, and then they can use that account to spend on apprenticeships because we want to make sure that businesses are investing in their workforces, and that's a good way to make sure they do it. And your point is, could we spend it on things that are not just apprenticeships, but maybe other skills qualifications as well? And our challenge is we think apprenticeships are brilliant and the gold standard, and if there was going to be flex, we want to make sure that we're not diluting the quality of the training that people are getting. So that's the conversations that they're having. But it's, as I said, we've already made some changes on the small companies and supply chains, and I know that they're talking about doing more. There was a question behind you. Yes, sir.
I think what we're seeing today is a really good example of two organisations working together strategically to deliver a supply chain solution. I guess my question really is, when we work in the public sector, it's not necessarily as strategic, it's more tactical. So what advice would you give an organisation like Wincanton to work more tactically with public sector customers? And probably more importantly, who do we talk to?
Gosh, well, I've got someone here on my team, so you can talk to them after we're finished, so I'll get them to come wave at you. But look, I'd like to think actually we should be working more strategically in the public sector too, right? I mean, I don't want to hear that it's somehow only tactical, because I think, back to the gentleman's question before about procurement, right? Actually, it's, the government should be having good strategic partnerships with companies in the private sector, where they can deliver good things for the country, right? That's obviously better for everybody. And companies that have that certainty of slightly longer term contracts that can then invest in their workforces properly, knowing that they've got that contract for a few years, those seem like sensible things for the government to be doing. I'd like to think we are doing it, but I'll make sure that we get someone to talk to you afterwards about how we can help you guys specifically. Right, any other questions? All good? All right, fine. Okay, so we've got some media questions. I've probably got a list somewhere here. Let's see. Right, should we start with, ITV?
Prime Minister, you'll be aware that markets are today discounting a significant risk of recession. Are falling house prices, rising unemployment, a recession, a price worth paying to get inflation down? And secondly, you just talked very eloquently about the need to restore trust in politics and politicians. You haven't yet told us whether you agree with the Privileges Committee report into Boris Johnson. Do you agree with it?
Right, so look, on your first question, Robert, like, nobody wants to see a recession. Of course I don't want to see a recession. No one wants to see a recession. And actually, part of the reason that we're seeing inflation be higher than we had anticipated previously is because the economy has done better. I don't know if you guys remember, everyone was forecasting that the UK would go into a recession this year, and that hasn't happened, right? Kind of defied everyone's expectation because the economy's performing well, jobs like yours are all being created, companies are growing, unemployment is at a very low level, and that is, of course, that is all a good thing, but it's meant that the inflation challenge has become a little bit tougher. So look, I always want to make sure that we're trying to grow the economy. But as I said, halving inflation on its way down to 2%, that's the right priority, because all the good things that we want, more jobs, higher wages, more investment in public services, lower taxes, all those things, we can't have any of those things unless we get inflation back down and then get interest rates coming down again, right? That has got to be the priority. Anyone who tells you that there's some shortcut is not being straight with you. Right? As much as I wish there was, there isn't. So we've got to stick to the course, and that's what's going to guide my actions throughout all of this. Look, and on your second question, the privileges, I have enormous respect for the Privileges Committee, support the Privileges Committee, and indeed respect the vote of the House that we had on Monday regarding Boris Johnson. But what I'd also say is, look, I'm not focused on the past. Right? I want to look forward, right? Like this, Boris Johnson is no longer a member of Parliament. It's right that people, whoever they are, whatever position they hold, face the results of their actions, that they're held accountable for their actions. That's happened. He's no longer a member of Parliament, right? We've got to focus on the future. That's what I'm doing as your Prime Minister. I think that's what you want me to do, is focus on all the things that we've talked about today. And with regard to that in general, I wasn't there to vote because I was at a charity dinner, as you know, but look, I'm someone who took a very difficult decision a while ago to resign from Boris Johnson's government, right? It's not an easy thing to do, to resign as being Chancellor, right? That's kind of a big deal. I did that because, as I said at the time, I disagreed with his approach to government, right? So I think that tells you that I'm prepared to act according to my values and the standards that I want to see, and that wasn't happening. So I didn't agree with the approach. I said that in my resignation letter, and that's why I resigned, right? So like in terms of that particular thing, because I think standards matter. As I think you said it, Alicia, first, right? Like integrity matters. It matters in business, it matters in public life too. And I want to act in a way that means you guys can have confidence that I'm acting with integrity, with professionalism, and that there's accountability. And as you saw in that situation, there was accountability, and you guys will be able to hold me to account for delivering all the things that we've talked about today. Right, next, Sky News.
Thank you. Prime Minister, you said today you want to be honest, that you're someone who is straight with people. Are you being straight when you say that everything is going to be okay, that we're 100% going to get through this, that you will halve inflation by the end of the year? Do you regret making that a personal priority? And should people trust you if that doesn't happen? And can I also ask, you're basically asking people to kind of hold their nerve and suffer pain in the medium term. Do you think that will cost you? Do you accept that will cost you at the ballot box?
So, Ali, I absolutely don't think it was a mistake to set as my #1 priority halving inflation, right? I am ambitious for our country, and I want to deliver on the things that are going to make most difference to all of you and your families. And we've got to get inflation down. And at the time I set that target, actually, lots of people said it wasn't ambitious enough, that it was too easy. And I knew that that wasn't true, right? I knew at the time that actually getting inflation down would be tough, right? And I wanted to set an ambitious target that we would work really hard to get to. I'm sure when you talk to your young leaders, you guys talk in your businesses about setting ambitious targets, right? You will strive to get them. And look, has it got harder? Yeah, of course it's got harder to meet that target. Right? The last couple of months have shown that it's got harder, but it's certainly not impossible, and I'm going to still give absolutely everything I've got to delivering on it. And more broadly, like, we've got to keep getting inflation down, because even once it's halved, that's not enough. We've got to get it all the way back down to 2%. That's our normal inflation target. But I wanted to say very clearly this was a priority, and it's something I'm working towards. And look, everyone will be able to make, you guys will be the judges of that, right? And you'll be able to see where we are in 6 months, 9 months, a year, and you'll see how I'm doing and whether I'm doing everything I can, whether you think it's reasonable or not. But I'll leave that up to you. But I just want to let you know that I think that is priority #1, and I'm doing everything I can to bring it down. And that is how you will restore trust in politics. It's because you set out very clearly what you're going to do, and you go about your hardest to deliver it, and then people can be the judges of whether that's worked or not. GB News.
Thank you. Yesterday, to Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions, you spoke about Labour policy that, in your view, would raise inflation. You've mentioned some of those things. Today, you mentioned banning supplies of new energy in the North Sea, about giving in to unions' unaffordable pay demands. You said that would make the situation worse. Yet, when you became Prime Minister, you raised benefits by 10.1%, you raised pensions by 10.1%, and you reversed recent liberalisations to onshore wind supply and, indeed, shale gas exploration. In your words, would that not make the situation worse too? And just in addition, if I may, the Conservative Party is putting out literature in the Uxbridge and South Ruislip by-election, attacking the Liberal Democrats for a target of 300,000 homes a year. Is that no longer the government's target?
Right, so I'm going to try, just so we can get in a few of your colleagues, if everyone tries not to have multiple questions, otherwise we won't be able to get everyone else in, and we hear from some others. Look, I firmly believe that Labour Party policy would make the situation worse. 100% do I believe that, right? And I've tried not to get into too much politics in these things, but you know, what do we know? The Labour Party policy is to borrow £28 billion a year, right? So, you know my view. I think borrowing huge amounts of money at a time when we're facing rising interest rates and inflation is not a good idea. It might be that all the things that would be spent on are things that people think, well, that sounds great, I'd like a bit of that, but I'm telling you, doing that at a time like this is the wrong thing to do. It would make the situation worse, and I wouldn't do that. Yes, Labour Party policy is to not do any more exploration of energy supplies in the North Sea. I think that's a mistake, right? I believe in net zero. We're going to get to net zero. but we're going to get there in decades, not overnight. Between now and then, we are still going to need oil and gas, and if we've got supplies of oil and gas here in the UK, it seems to me absurd not to use those, A, because it will create jobs, but B, because it improves our energy security and it reduces inflation. So, we've seen over the last year what happens when energy dictators around the world are able to hold us to ransom, right? So actually cutting off our own supplies of energy seems to me an incredibly short-sighted policy. It would definitely make the situation worse. And lastly, on public sector pay again, right? Look, I value our public sector workers. They do an incredible job, whether they're in the NHS, whether they're teachers, right? All of them, right? Now, of course, everyone would like to be paid more, but I have to be cognizant of what we can afford, what's responsible, and it would be being dishonest with people to say, okay, great, I'm going to borrow a ton of money so I can give you a generous pay rise, make my life easier for a bit, but knowing full well that all I've done is fuel more inflation and higher interest rates, and that extra pay packet you got 1 month ultimately is just going to get eaten up and then some, because we're dealing with more inflation down the line, right? I'm not going to do that. It is difficult for me. Of course it's difficult for me. Would my life be easier if I was able to say yes to everyone? It would be. But it's the wrong thing for all of you, it's the wrong thing for the country, and it's also the wrong thing for those public sector workers, as I said, because they will also pay the price of higher inflation in the long run. So that's my approach on that. BBC.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason, BBC News. You've said today, you've tried to reassure people this afternoon that it's going to be okay. Isn't the blunt truth that for some people it won't be okay if you're going to be able to get inflation down?
Well, Chris, I've never said this is going to be easy, right? Like getting inflation down, I've always said this is going to be tough and it's going to take time. But I'm determined to do it, and it's right that we do it because in the long run that is the best way to help everyone. Because inflation eats away at the money in your pocket, and that's wrong. And that's why I feel a deep moral responsibility to get it down, and I'm prepared to do what it takes to do that. That does mean making some difficult decisions, but those are the right decisions for the country in the long run. Because if we don't get a grip of this, it will just get worse and it will last for longer. And it hurts particularly those on the lowest incomes, right? Inflation is always the worst for people who are the most vulnerable. And that's why, as I said, I feel a deep moral responsibility to get it down, and that's what we're determined to do, right? And I'm being straight with people. It's not easy, it will take time, and it requires difficult decisions, but that's what responsible leadership looks like. We talked about it, we heard it very eloquently from all three of you, right? That's the type of leaders you aspire to be, that's the type of leader that I am, and that's what the government's going to deliver. We've got the FT.
Hi, it's Anna Gross from the Financial Times. You warned about the risk of inflation when you were Chancellor. Do you think that the Bank of England has moved too slowly, has done too little too late to tame inflation?
So I support the Bank of England in what they're doing, and I'd point back to what I said earlier. What we're grappling with here as a country is something that many other countries are grappling with at the same time. So interest rates in America, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, as I mentioned, all pretty similar to the interest rates here. Interest rates in Europe are at the highest they've been in 20 years, right? Just to give you some context. And all central banks around the world are worried about the persistence of inflation and are taking steps to bring it down by raising interest rates. So as I said, that is the global context for what we're facing. You know, it's not unique to the UK, and it's right that the Bank of England takes strong action to bring inflation down. They've got a target to get it back down to 2%. It's right that they deliver on that because ultimately, right, it is the best thing for the country. Right? There is no short-term easy fix to this. There's no shortcut. Anyone standing here telling you there's some shortcut is not being straight with you. Right? So those of us who are responsible for this have to take the responsible decisions in the long-term interests of our country and all of you. That's what I'm doing, and that's what the Bank of England are doing too. And lastly, we've got the Telegraph.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Dominic Penner on the Telegraph. Is there now zero chance for a major tax cut this year, or is that something that is still possible? And your own backbenchers who are calling for tax cuts, are they being irresponsible?
So it goes back to what I said to all of you before, right? Would I love to cut your taxes tomorrow? Yeah, of course I would. right? I mean, I'm a politician, I'm a conservative politician. Who wouldn't want to cut people's taxes, right? Like, do you think if I thought that was a good thing to do, I wouldn't have done it? Of course I would, right? But it goes back to what I was saying before, right? Borrowing lots of money to do things that sound great isn't the responsible approach. It's not going to help anyone in the long run. And same with, I talk about public sector pay, tax cuts, spending. You know, ultimately, if the government is having to borrow money to do all those things, it just puts fuel on the fire of inflation, makes it worse, makes it last longer, means interest rates will go up even more, and that's not going to do anyone any favours. And you talk about tax cuts. You know what? The biggest tax cut that this government could deliver for you and for everyone else is to halve inflation, right? That is a massive tax cut, because there is inflation right now that is making everyone poorer, that is eating into the pounds in your pocket, it's eroding your paychecks, it's pushing up the prices of everything, it's eating into your savings, pushing up interest rates. Inflation is the tax, right? So if we can halve inflation and then get it down to 2% over time, right, that is the biggest tax cut we could deliver. So that's what I'm focused on doing. All right, good. Well, look, guys, thank you so much for having me. It's been great. It's really nice to meet you, particularly you guys who I thought were incredibly eloquent talking about what you're doing. It actually just fills me with enormous confidence, right? Because, you know, I talked about this, and yeah, we've got some tough stuff to get through. We will get through it, and we should be confident about the future because of people like you, right? Talking in such an inspiring way about what you want to do when your careers progress. Your story replicated across the country is why all of us should have confidence in the future of our country, because we've got great days ahead of us and people like you are going to help us realize it. And my job is to give you every opportunity and support your success, and that's what I'm trying to do. Good. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.